Forget everything you think you know about attraction and respect. What if I told you, value isn't earned through effort, but through absence? The world has taught men to chase approval. But the truth is simpler, darker, and far more powerful. The less of yourself you give, the more the world begins to feel your weight. This is the masculine frame, and how scarcity creates value. You have watched men tirelessly bend themselves into forms they believe women desire, sacrificing conviction for fleeting approval, mistaking activity for influence, and volume for presence. They speak too much. They move too quickly. They offer themselves as if their value could be measured in attention or affirmation, forgetting that the unseen, the unoffered, the withheld is the true measure of worth. And she senses it, the imbalance, the hunger in their eagerness, the exposure of their need. Women are calibrated to detect the subtle currents of presence and absence, the weight of self-possession and the silent pull of controlled energy. Every glance, every pause, every moment you withhold resonates far more powerfully than the 1,000 words of a man who has yet to master the inner law of his own value. Imagine standing quietly in a crowded room, the chatter around you rising like a tide, each voice clamoring for attention, each gesture a claim for recognition. And yet, within this storm, there is gravity in your stillness. She notices it, not because you have displayed charm, not because you perform or exaggerate, but because the very act of restraint signals certainty in your being. You are not seeking her validation. You do not bend to her moods, and you do not test her attention with effort or urgency. And in that quiet absence, your presence amplifies. It becomes weighty, magnetic, unavoidable. This is the mechanism she reacts to, the invisible currency of attraction and respect that cannot be measured by charm alone, the tension between availability and elusiveness, between constant pursuit and the disciplined pause, between exposure and self-possession. Most men mistake compliance for mastery. They believe value is given, measured in time, attention, and effort. Yet true authority comes from what you withhold. The Stoic man understands that his energy, like rare metal, must be guarded, allocated only where it preserves integrity, where it creates impact, where it magnifies the unseen influence he exerts. Scarcity is not a trick or a superficial tactic. It is a law of perception, a quiet, unspoken force that commands attention and respect precisely because it is restrained, deliberate, and unseen. And she senses this often before she can articulate it, instinctively attuned to the gravity of a man whose life is not dictated by her awareness or by the fleeting whims of desire, whose choices are measured against his own code, not the approval of others. Reflect on moments in your past where you gave too freely, where your eagerness betrayed your composure, where a woman's attention shifted as your presence became ordinary. It is not malice in her perception. It is instinct, an unconscious calibration of respect, attraction, and value. When a man steps back, even slightly, when he withdraws attention, when he allows absence to create space, the tension this generates is palpable. The gap between what is present and what is offered magnifies perception. The value of your presence is not in what you display, but in the contrast between availability and inaccessibility. This is the masculine frame, the silent architecture of influence and magnetism that requires no performance, no pleading, no external validation. Every word you do not speak, every gesture you temper, every deliberate pause between thought and action becomes part of a tapestry that communicates far more than display ever could. The average man saturates the canvas, moving loudly, seeking recognition, and leaving no room for tension, no space for gravity to form. The Stoic man leaves the negative space deliberate, allowing absence, restraint, and subtle presence to shape the perception of power and value. Early micro-realizations begin to crystallize. She responds not to effort, but to disciplined energy. Not to proximity, but to the gravitational pull of absence. Not to noise, but to the weight of quiet authority. And in recognizing this, your internal landscape begins to shift. Your identity, previously anchored in external approval, begins to root itself in self-command, in composure, in the knowledge that the value of your presence cannot be manufactured. It can only be revealed through intentional scarcity. This is the first revelation. Attraction, respect, and perceived value are reflections of invisible laws, principles older than culture, older than convention, yet visible in the smallest motions, the subtlest gestures, the weight of being. As she senses the tension between availability and elusiveness, between emotional volatility and controlled mastery, she is drawn, often unconsciously, to the architecture of authority you project without effort. Here, the first seeds of transformation are sown. The less you give in need, the more weight your presence carries. The less you chase, the more influence accrues. The more disciplined your withdrawal, the greater the magnetic resonance of your being. Already, within these initial moments of awareness, your perception begins to sharpen. You notice not only the behavior of others, but the invisible currents in any interaction, the unspoken signals of attraction, the subtle recalibrations of attention that occur when a man holds himself with quiet command. The Stoic masculine frame is not taught, it is realized, cultivated in observation, reinforced through practice, and anchored in the understanding that scarcity of action, restraint of attention, and the deliberate preservation of presence are far more persuasive than any display of effort. And in these realizations, micro-transformations occur. You begin to perceive the world not as a series of interactions to be won or lost, but as a mirror reflecting the authority, discipline, and weight you project simply by existing with self-possession. Every glance that lingers, every moment of hesitation in approach, every subtle recalibration of attention becomes a reflection of your emergent authority. She notices the unclaimed energy, the measured absence, the disciplined withdrawal, and she reacts, not consciously, not manipulatively, but instinctively, aligning her perception with the invisible law you have begun to embody. This is the first layer of mastery, understanding that attraction, respect, and influence are not transactional, but emergent properties of self-mastery. And as you internalize this, you feel the shift within yourself, the quiet, undeniable power that arises from being a man who is not defined by the attention he receives, but by the restraint he exerts, by the scarcity he preserves, and by the subtle gravitational pull of the presence he commands without effort. By the end of this opening revelation, you understand that the masculine frame is not a performance, not a set of techniques, not a series of gestures to be measured by results. It is a living principle, a law of perception, an invisible force that shapes the way the world and she perceives you. The less you give of yourself in need, the more weight your presence carries. The less you chase, the more respect accumulates. And the more deliberate your withdrawal, the more the unseen architecture of attraction forms around you, compelling recognition, admiration, and desire through nothing more than the disciplined orchestration of your own being. The man who commands attention without asking for it has learned the oldest law of influence. Control is not exerted outward, it is preserved inward. The world may rush around him, women may test his edges, and situations may pull at his patience, yet his energy remains contained, unspilled, like a sealed vessel of pressure. This containment is not cold detachment, it is conscious direction. It is knowing that attention given freely loses its power, but attention granted with precision becomes a force that bends perception itself. Every human interaction carries an invisible exchange rate. What is abundant is ignored, and what is rare becomes sacred. This is not manipulation. It is a natural law of perception. When your time, your presence, and your emotional availability flood too freely, the other person's mind ceases to assign them value. You've removed the mystery, the anticipation, the emotional contrast that fuels attraction. But when you withhold, not as punishment, but as discipline, you create the emotional oxygen the dynamic needs to breathe. Scarcity heightens sensitivity. Restraint magnifies meaning. Stoic philosophy teaches that mastery begins where reaction ends. Epictetus warned that a man who cannot control his impulses is owned by them. And Seneca wrote that he who is everywhere is nowhere. These truths stretch beyond philosophy. They bleed into psychology, into the subconscious perception of value itself. When a woman feels a man's restraint, she senses that he is anchored in something deeper than desire, that his focus is not scattered, that his self is not up for negotiation. His absence becomes a mirror, reflecting her own uncertainty, her own yearning for approval. And in that reflection, curiosity is born. Machiavelli would call this the art of controlled distance, the silent assertion of power through unpredictability. To reveal less than is expected, to move with purpose, not noise, to allow absence to speak louder than words. A man who does not constantly seek to be seen inevitably becomes the one who cannot be ignored. You might think this creates tension or even discomfort, but it is this very tension that breeds fascination. The feminine psyche does not attach through satisfaction alone. It attaches through curiosity, through the unresolved emotional contradiction of wanting to understand the man who will not fully reveal himself. Behavioral psychology confirms what the ancients already knew. Intermittent reward creates the deepest bond. When attention is predictable, its impact dulls. When it is uncertain, granted at moments of your choosing, it imprints more deeply because her mind cannot control or anticipate its return. You become, in her perception, something beyond comprehension, an emotional variable she cannot fully define, and the mind by nature obsesses over what it cannot define. Scarcity isn't about hiding, it's about creating rhythm. It's the tempo between presence and withdrawal, between engagement and silence, that builds anticipation and emotional intensity. Now imagine the psychological contrast between two men. One seeks to prove his worth through words, gestures, endless validation seeking. The other remains measured, deliberate, letting silence speak where noise would have diluted his weight. She may find both men attractive in passing, but her respect, her fixation, her emotional investment gravitates toward the latter. Why? Because his restraint creates a mental echo. Even when he leaves the room, his absence lingers like a chord unresolved, a gravity she cannot easily escape. Her mind replays what little he offered, stretching it into meaning, assigning value to moments that, in truth, were ordinary. But framed by scarcity, they become extraordinary. Scarcity, then, is not a tactic. It is a language, the language of the self-contained. It is the discipline to know that attention, time, emotion, and energy are the currencies of value, and to spend them with precision is to cultivate magnetism without noise. The Stoics call it virtue, the Machiavellians call it power, psychology calls it reward association, but all three point to the same truth. The more you control your presence, the more others are controlled by their perception of you. You begin to see how this transforms not only relationships with women, but your entire life. The man who masters scarcity does not only attract, he commands environments. In business, he becomes the one who does not rush to speak, whose silence makes others lean forward. Among men, he becomes the one whose opinion carries weight, because it is not easily given. In every sphere, scarcity creates reverence. Because when the world knows that you do not need to be seen, it starts working to see you. And yet, this mastery cannot be faked. False scarcity, the game playing, the strategic unavailability, is easily detected because it stems from insecurity, not command. Authentic scarcity arises from abundance within, from the quiet conviction that your value exists independent of external approval. You do not withhold to provoke reaction. You withhold because your attention is sacred, and only those aligned with your standards may receive it. This is the masculine inversion of value. Your worth is not proven by what you offer, it is maintained by what you protect. At this point, another realization surfaces, one subtle but powerful. Every moment you choose stillness over reaction, silence over justification, detachment over desperation, you recondition how others perceive you. You are no longer at the mercy of the external world. You become its reference point. She no longer tests to see if you can hold your composure. She begins to align herself with your emotional pace. Respect emerges not because you demanded it, but because you demonstrated it through restraint. Attraction deepens, not because you chased it, but because your absence forced reflection. You start to feel it in your body, in the weight of your silence, in the steadiness of your breath, in the way others pause when you finally decide to speak. The masculine frame is not an armor, it's an atmosphere. It is the invisible field you create through self-command, through the disciplined preservation of your presence. Women are drawn to it not because it flatters them, but because it steadies them. In a world of emotional volatility, your calm becomes a sanctuary. Your restraint becomes intrigue. Your scarcity becomes value. And yet, the greatest transformation is internal. You realize that this principle, scarcity, was never about others. It was about the reclamation of your own self. The moment you stop scattering your energy across validation, you begin to consolidate power. Your focus sharpens, your emotions align. You no longer exist as fragments seeking reflection. You exist as an unshakable whole. The world feels it before you say a word. There comes a moment when the lesson of scarcity no longer feels like strategy. It becomes identity. You stop guarding your presence because it's valuable. It becomes valuable because you naturally guard it. You no longer withdraw to create tension. Distance becomes your rhythm, the quiet pulse of self-mastery. You do not need to chase gravity when you already are it. She begins to sense this before words ever pass between you. In your stillness, she feels certainty. In your silence, she feels direction. What once seemed like mystery now feels like inevitability, the realization that your restraint is not absence, but control. The more composed you are, the more alive her emotions become. You are the calm that makes her chaos meaningful, the unmoving center that gives her motion purpose. And that is the secret most men never learn. Value is not proven, it is perceived. Respect is not demanded, it is evoked. Attraction is not seized, it is allowed. The moment you stop chasing, the dynamic reverses. The world leans toward you. She leans toward you. You become the rare presence in an age of noise. The man who moves slower, speaks less, and carries more meaning in his pauses than others do in their declarations. Your energy becomes a silent mirror, reflecting strength, restraint, and purpose. This is the masculine frame fully realized. Not performance, but presence. Not dominance through force, but influence through stillness. By now, you understand why scarcity creates value, because what is rare demands reverence, and what is disciplined becomes divine. The less of yourself you give, the more of yourself they feel. That is the quiet power of the man who no longer needs to be seen to be remembered.